Tonight, I'm going to begin an important conversation with you using the analogy of a Band-Aid. Y'all know about Band-Aids. You probably have one in your pocket, in your backpack, in your purse. You might have one on your finger. A Band-Aid is there when you need it. Maybe your fingers got too close to that knife when you were chopping your vegetables, or your favorite shoes wore a blister, or maybe you had a nick shaving. What that Band-Aid does is it wraps around the finger, stops the blood, provides a protective environment, and allows the sore to heal. Emergency food, or the charity food system, exists to serve people who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Like a Band-Aid, it's there when you need it. But 41.2 million Americans depend on food aid because they're food insecure. 41.2 million Americans. That's more than the population of California. So these folks are spread throughout the United States. It's just not one pocket of people that are food insecure. The U.S. Department of Agriculture provides a map, and we see them spread throughout all 50 states and the district. So what is the fix for 41.2 million who are food insecure, and how did they get there in the first place? Well, let's start with this Band-Aid fix first. Enter the white knight of charity food. It comes in the form of a food bank, maybe a food pantry, maybe boxes of food, or bags that were put together. Or in schools, it takes the form of backpacks that are sent home with the kids on the weekend to make up for what wasn't available with breakfast, school breakfast and school lunch. The hardest hit group of folks are those that are earning minimum wage and working, sometimes working more than one job. What happens is with a minimum wage job, you have your SNAP benefits reduced and sometimes eliminated. And so it's those folks that are at 200% or less of the poverty line that are really hammered with food insecurity. It's not unusual for these folks to work more than one job, to juggle childcare, to pay rent, to pay car payments, sometimes child support on top of that, based on a minimum wage. Now, just to refresh your memory, the federal minimum wage is $7.25. 29 states in the US have a state minimum wage higher than the federal. In fact, in Michigan, we just increased our minimum wage in January to $9.25. Now, minimum wage jobs have other inherent risks. One of the risks is when employers schedule based on workload. So on a schedule, you look like you've got 40 hours a week. But in reality, when the traffic is slow, customers aren't coming in on that particular day, you're sent home early. What that results in is a check that varies. It's not the same check as if you're a salaried employee. You can count on that check every other week if that's how you're paid. But with minimum wage jobs that go and are scheduled on that workload concept, their check varies from payday to payday. Now, if your check varies, guess what doesn't? Your rent, your child support, your car payment. Enter the white knight of food charity. The only place to be able to gather a few more funds for that particular month is to squeeze your food budget. And when you squeeze your food budget, it takes the form of chronic stress in the family. Can you imagine that getting towards the end of the month and your cupboards are pretty bare? So you decide that you can skip that meal so that your kids can have just a little bit more. Or maybe you'll eat less so the rest of the family can have more. Food charity is there as a Band-Aid. And that explains why it continues to be used. So let's look a little deeper at what else is challenging to these minimum wage families. Let's take a look at rent. Rent has gone up faster than inflation and certainly faster than what minimum wage has. In fact, that you needed to work 117 hours a week at minimum wage to be able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment at market rate. 117 hours a week. And if a 2-bedroom is too much of a luxury, well, downsize to a 1-bedroom. In order to be able to afford that, you need to make $17 an hour. So when you look at housing without housing support available, it's out of reach. So something as basic as stable housing isn't available to these families. Now, this discussion wouldn't be complete until we went and looked at what was going on with food. With food, what we've got is a consumer price index that shows us how much inflation has occurred with food. And so what I looked at was food that was available that was purchased from grocery stores. So this is food that's consumed in the home, not eaten out. So in the last year, we've had a 1% inflation in food. Now that doesn't sound bad. 1% is like nothing. But that's an average. When you start to look at individual food groups, what you find is that fruit and vegetables, fresh fruit and vegetables, went up between 4 and 5%. So it makes it even harder for lower income working families to be able to buy fresh fruits and vegetables for their family. So let's strip away this Band-Aid and let's find out what's festering underneath of it, because it's not healing. So if we rip that Band-Aid off, what we're going to find underneath is economic inequality, the lack of a living wage, poverty, and lack of food justice. So what can we do to get to that festering sore? How can we address that? It's a huge, huge problem. I might suggest a few things this evening. One of them is to develop some empathy for minimum wage working families, to develop a more intimate knowledge of what it is like to juggle multiple jobs, childcare, and pay bills and buy groceries. Not just groceries to fill the belly, but groceries to nourish the family. We need to advocate for high-impact programs that are sustainable. We need to be looking for rent support. We need to understand what it means to have a living wage. And we need to share knowledge to be able to put other programs into place. A great example. How about if we brought together a farmer, a health educator, and a city planner? And we started looking at all of the empty lots. What about if it became normative behavior to have gardens in the front yard, gardens in the backyard, gardens on the side yards? And to be able to understand where food comes from, but also to be able to use it to augment our diets. What about teaching food preservation skills? You know, that zucchini and those tomatoes that always show up towards the end of summer? You don't know what to do with them. You keep giving them away. What if we had those old-timey skills that we could preserve those and be able to use those fruits and vegetables in the winter? Those are real-time things that we'll be able to do and to put into place for these working families. Now, we're always going to need Band-Aids. They're there when you need them. They're there for emergencies. But trying to cobble together minimum wage working families with a little bit of gauze and tape is not the solution. And our families deserve better. Thank you.